Mob Mentality Show. Here we are with myself, Chris Lucian, Austin Chadwick, and Zach Rogers. Welcome, and why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
So I am a recent transfer to software development. I'm an associate software developer. I just started my career about 6 to 7 months ago. Lately, the realm that I've been kind of diving deeper and deeper into has been DevOps. But I've just begun that journey.
Awesome. Yeah, and I think we do have to note that you were a rocket scientist. So, so it has to be noted because we always just say like, well, we can solve that problem because we have a rocket scientist in our mob. It's no problem.
Nice, nice.
I did make the transition from propulsion engineer to software developer.
All right. Well, yeah, and you know who wouldn't want to make that transition? Okay, so we have some topics here, and so I think one thing that maybe you realized early on, and maybe you can talk about this a little bit, was the necessity to learn DevOps engineering in a software engineering role, and what your experience was like with that and learning that.
Yeah, so that's something that I quickly realized as I became part of the mob. Luckily for me, the environment that I came into had CI set up, but we were creating a new project, and because that new project, it's a goal of ours to always have CI/CD set up from the get-go. Immediately when I came in, we started working on pipelines for our CI for our new application. At the time, it was really small, but it was something that we immediately needed to do. And it's something that became really important to me at that point. After we made the pipeline, moving into the DevOps role, it started becoming more and more important to me, and I started to understand really the necessity of it once we moved into basically a newer architecture for a greenfield application that we had. So we wanted to do a serverless architecture that was hosted on AWS, that was all put on an S3 bucket and delivered via CloudFront. And that doesn't really happen without knowing what those resources were. And it was kind of knowing what resources we needed that kind of got me interested in what I wanted to do. And that's kind of what sparked my, interest in learning more about DevOps.
Yeah. And I think, at least for me, the need for DevOps has grown because I feel like the big drive is continuous delivery, right? Mm-hmm. People want to deliver to production often. Yep. They want to, from a lean and agile perspective, run experiments and, put a new feature out, see if it gets used, and then inspect and adapt on that kind of thing. Yeah. And you can't really do that without DevOps, right? And then it's like, well, how can you release daily? Well, you kind of need automated tests and you need a pipeline and you need to do this quickly and not manually, right? And so I feel like the drive for continuous delivery has spurred on, automated testing, which has been good for those from the extreme programming community. Yeah.
Well, yeah, so that's really funny. Just the necessity of automated testing is interesting because I just recently spoke with a professional DevOps engineer who's been doing it for 3 or 4 years now. Mm-hmm. And they said that they went from a team with full unit tests and full code coverage to a team with none. And what the result was is that they couldn't do the best possible DevOps job that they could because they couldn't convince the team to do unit testing. And so when a DevOps engineer has this goal of making everything lean and creating basically an optimal value stream map around the software creation, it's an interesting thing. You're dependent, the DevOps engineers are highly dependent on the software engineers. The software engineers are highly dependent on the DevOps engineers. If those specialties aren't working together, it's very hard to get anything done.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
So maybe we'll transition to the next topic. So DevOps has become really important. So how was it learning DevOps via mobbing?
Yeah.
Switch that over.
Yeah, so like I was saying before, the first introduction that I had to DevOps was kind of the pipeline creation, and it became normalized in our place of work that when you're starting a project, CI/CD needs to be a part of the project. So immediately starting with the pipeline, it seemed necessary for us, and the first thing that we did. So like Chris was saying, this wasn't something that got kicked off to another department in order for us to do. It was all something that we had to mob on. So we were unfamiliar with pipeline works and the way that it was supposed to be set up, but luckily we had pipeline examples that we could use to kind of graft our learning onto. So using that and learning in the mob environment helped everyone understand the importance of CI/CD because we were the ones that had to build it, and that forcing everyone to learn it and going through it with the mob helps you become, I wouldn't say a better software engineer. I think the phrasing would be, it helps you really understand the resources required in pushing an application out. And that can help you give greater understanding to what goes into the whole process. And so now when you're on the mob, if you integrate the DevOps role into the mob, you have basically the whole cycle. You know exactly how your application goes from the very beginning to how it gets pushed out to production. And that's not something that here is normal for other environments.
Yeah, it's very true. I think that in some of the more traditional environments that I've come across that do have DevOps engineers, which is probably even more rare, is that there's a big separation, and it is kind of like, you know, throwing it over the wall, and you know, I just think that that's just a really unhealthy behavior, and it's fundamentally just it does not optimize for flow efficiency. It optimizes for resource efficiency, and what that means is that a single item going through the process, once it's lobbed over the fence, is there is a queuing time between the developers and the DevOps engineers. If they're not working together on each task to get everything through to production when it's created, and there's a queuing time associated with that's fundamentally where a large majority of process waste occurs in a software team. And then that delay causes a degrade in capability of actually addressing the items that show up when those things are blocked. So it's kind of fundamentally important that we work together on getting that. And so I think at minimum, DevOps engineers need to be together with software engineers in a war room if there's anything blocking the pipeline. Anything making your cycle time longer as a DevOps engineer is a risk to your performance, right?
Yeah. I really agree with that idea of, at the very least, having them inside of a war room working together in order to create the application. Otherwise, if you end up with two isolated teams that are kind of kicking responsibilities back to one another, the application can actually be made worse off. One physical way that can happen is that a traditional application you might just deploy to a normal web server. So you can build a whole web application, deploy it to a server, and if you want to make it on the cloud, a DevOps engineer is like, okay, well, here's my application. I'll throw it on an EC2 instance. I'll throw it on another EC2 instance, and you can just keep doing that. Whereas a better architecture might be found if you're implementing it through microservices, and the way that you're going to be doing that is not throwing everything onto an EC2 instance, but using managed services like Lambdas, like S3 buckets, and the relational database servers, so that you're not always spinning up EC2s. And that can only be found when you're merging basically the software development side with the DevOps side.
Yeah. Yeah, and so for me, I came from an environment where things were more separated. So you had the developers writing code, you had testers, manually testing and writing automated end-to-end tests. Mm-hmm. And then me being the Scrum Master / coach at the time cared about CI/CD, so I was mainly writing the pipelines. And so it was all separated, right? And so, but what you would get is you'd have testers to be like, oh, it'd be really awesome to write an integration test that doesn't involve the UI. And then we try to write that, but the code wasn't written in a way where it was testable, right? Mm-hmm. And I'm sure there's infrastructure analogies as well. We write in a certain way that it's harder to separate and deploy into a microservice because everything's coupled together, right? And so testability and deployability probably go hand in hand now that the more I think about it. Yeah. And so when I started mobbing, it was awesome to be able to be like, oh, let's all do it together. Mm-hmm. We'll write the feature, we'll write the automated tests, and then we'll struggle through the infrastructure if we don't have the knowledge, or we'll bring in someone more knowledgeable to come mob with us for a while. And so not doing infrastructure as code or things like that before, and then mobbing it for only a year or less, it's amazing how much you can just pick up with mobbing with a specialist, even just for a little bit, you know. And so
I think that's probably true for any specialist. I think that our DevOps engineers will end up mobbing with software engineers and network infrastructure teams at the same time, and just to get that thing through. But and I think a lot of this goes back to the efficiency paradox type stuff. It's just making sure that item can make it all the way through the system every time. Will likely remove the blocks for most other normal day-to-day work. And so if you have the specialists kind of floating around but joining mobs whenever they're needed, you'll end up creating this sort of efficiency for actually reducing the cycle time, which is kind of one of the main goals in teams today, right?
Yeah.
So I have a follow-up question for you. So I'm guessing you weren't mob engineering before. What was rocket science? You weren't mobbing rocket science before.
Not at all.
So you learned a different way, and then you joined a mob and you learned software development and DevOps. What were the differences for you in learning between the two different worlds, I guess?
Yeah. Big differences between the way that I was working with other coworkers. Before, it was kind of locked in a closet, kind of, all right, go spit some stuff out at the end of 2 weeks. All right, what do you got? Without really collaborating with other people, and then you might integrate it with other people's work. Mobbing is very different because it's an active collaboration between people all the time. And when I was working by myself on one thing, it's helpful in one way in that if you run into a barrier, it's on you in order to discover how to get past that barrier. That can be very helpful. Solo work in which you have to overcome a barrier it's helpful in that you can discover how to do that. I think it's helpful in learning that skill. I don't think it's helpful in producing things faster. So there's definitely a point at which mobbing, it can make you just way faster and get over the small hurdles that you wouldn't normally be able to. And so I think from an efficiency standpoint, and it's hard to compare because one's propulsion engineering to software engineering. I would still feel, even if I was mobbing and as a propulsion engineer, I would still feel that it would be better because you're getting over the small hurdles, small sanity checks way faster than you would be if you were just kind of by yourself, always having to do sanity checks, slamming your head against the wall, against something you might move far quicker on, and you can come up with designs better for.
Nice.
Yeah, I think I was talking to maybe Jason Kearney at one point, and we were talking a little bit about this concept of like learning theft, right? So like if you did something by yourself, then you'd have to struggle for it, and so that struggling makes you remember it more. Learning theft is, I think, kind of an anti-pattern in the mob where a team member might be struggling and then somebody just blurts out what the answer is, rather than holding empathy for the person learning and saying like, okay, well, what's the minimum amount of information to give them that aha moment without giving them too much right away. Because that is one way that I think silos are created in the mob, is that just things are just offered up. And rather than somebody making a discovery or having an aha moment, that just things kind of fluidly just get fed to them and then they kind of turn off their brain, right? And that's like one of the worst things that we can do. And so a lot of we had been thinking a lot about this idea of just saying, how do we reduce learning theft, and that led a lot to ideas around navigating the navigator and things along those lines. So
that's cool.
I think that's a really important thing to point out. You can't just offer the answer, especially if you're the only one on the team. So like, this is a good heuristic, is if you're the only one on the team that knows how to move forward, then just giving the answer is probably not the right thing to do. And a lot of it is going to be, proactive, Socratic question asking and things like that, like, as well as offering like what they might Google rather than, just training up some of the skills about how they'd find those answers themselves would be really important.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's part of just growth in the roles as a mobber, right? You know, so you're learning, your focus is on learning, your focus is on contributing. So when you're in a contributing mode, you probably just say the answer, right? Yeah. But then as you grow as a person, as an engineer, you want to be coaching, right? You want to be helping grow up others. And so I think that's kind of what you're getting at is, you really want to learn to be a coach with it. And I've seen the value of both. So times we've mobbed with a DevOps specialist and learned. Sometimes the contributing was super helpful. Like, we're struggling, like, this is all this work. Oh yeah, just use this tool and it'll automate infrastructure as code, and like boom, we're deploying in a half an hour, which probably would have taken us days before.
I think suggesting a tool is different versus like discovering a novel answer, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like or what I see a lot too is this leap from like here's the tool versus like here's what you Google for that. And so it's really important, I think, just be wary of just saying like magically out of thin air this answer appeared, here you go, versus this is the logical set of steps that it would have taken you to research this, and here you go, right? Like and there's a very big disconnect between those.
And that's actually what I was going to get to was and there were times where the specialist didn't know the answer, and he would mob with us to research it, but I saw how he was searching. It's like, oh, he's going to this website a lot, oh, he's searching this or that a lot. And then when he wasn't mobbing with us, it was like, oh, we kind of picked up those patterns of how to find the answer, right?
Yeah.
And so I think in that case, it maybe wasn't explicitly coaching or Socratic, but we did pick up his researching ability, right? And so,
nice. I think one other thing that I wanted to tack onto that was that I didn't mention, and the differences between working by yourself as opposed to mobbing, which is the rate at which you're able to learn, because you have three minds all focused on the same thing. They can teach you those new things. If you are working by yourself, whether it be on code or propulsion engineering, a lot of your learning is just done on forums, just random searching, and that can take a long time to find an answer. When you're mobbing, a lot of time those answers are right next to you, and they can be discovered rapidly. And if you're in kind of a coaching role or more of a senior developer, they can really help you kind of walk through the steps mentally of teaching you something. And additionally, they can also be, even if they just offer the answer, it is still some form of learning that you did not have the access to before. And forum learning, which is pretty common, that is what it ends up happening. Normally, you're not getting this broad overview. It's kind of like, okay, here's an answer, I'll implement it.
Yeah, copy pasta.
And it takes time it takes time in order to be able to find that itself. Mobbing kind of helps to remove a lot of that. Not all of it, but a lot of it.
Yes. Yeah.
Cool. So learning DevOps. So we know DevOps is a necessity. We learn DevOps as a mob, and so kind of the natural progression of that is, so when you have enough DevOps engineers, what's it like going to a DevOps mob versus mobbing with the DevOps engineers? What's its effect on flow efficiency and resource efficiency? What are the side effects?
Ooh, this is a tough question, because I know
I wish I had an answer.
Yeah, there are different people with different opinions on this one, right? I mean, it's kind of the classic problem that's happened a lot in traditional development, even Agile development, is you get like, oh, we're breaking into teams and we're kind of cross-functional, but there's the front-end team, there's the back-end team, and then DevOps is just like another iteration of that, right? So I guess it's a pro and con, just like in any of those things. It's like you have a bunch of people who are really good at DevOps, a bunch of people really good at back-end or front-end, and they can churn out that work quickly, but then you get a flow problem, right? It's like, oh, the front-end's done, but the back-end's not done, right? Or the infrastructure's ready, but we got nothing to deploy, or or there's no good unit tests on it, and so we deploy with a lot of risk, and so and so I know in our environment there's been toggling back and forth between these two modes, where there's been DevOps mobs at times, and then more lately I guess it's been more mixed, being passed around.
Yeah.
And then you've been kind of spearheading something lately that is where... Can you talk about the summits you've been doing?
Yeah. So I've been trying to champion DevOps within our own department in order to be able to like get people interested in DevOps, and not just general DevOps, like mostly cloud infrastructure, because I think that's areas in which we can all improve. So it's kind of be the champion of that thing and offer small summits like 2 to 4 hours where you're walking through an exercise or creating a piece of infrastructure that other people might not be familiar with, and other developers are there with you. It's kind of a learning session for them where you're teaching and then other people are learning from you. And so that's been a pretty positive thing that I've been doing lately. I haven't been able to implement some of those infrastructure pieces yet, but tomorrow we'll be doing another one on Lambda layers, and that one will be directly going into some of the production code, because we've had a lot of headaches on one of our teams with dealing with Lambda layers and dependencies, and I think there's a way to clean it up. And so we'll be mobbing on that tomorrow for the DevOps Summit.
This is kind of a pattern that I've seen a little bit in the group of just basically saying, fairly recently, maybe within this year, I had a lot of one-on-ones with team members, things along those lines, and then I realized like a lot of the questions that were just building up too faster than the amount of one-on-ones I could have. So then I started doing a lot of lean coffees. I just said, hey, let's get 6 of us and just ask questions like you would in a one-on-one, and let's get as many of those out of the way as possible. That turned out to be really good, and then we kind of started into coaching lean coffees and that sort of thing, and then we also had. Based off of the TIG group, the Tech Immersion group that was here in Carlsbad, we started doing, what are they called? The mentorship circles. And so we just started saying, like, let's do interest-based communication a lot more. Mm-hmm. And I think that's kind of carried on into this in lean coffees around the DevOps topic. I've seen lean coffees for databases scheduled recently. And so like specialist groups that are specialist concepts, right? Like, and as long as you can have people moving between the specialties, whether or not they, if they want to be as a part of it, having that optional communication forum to be there and just sit down and discuss it and say like, where can we improve? That has been really cool to see, because I think when you're on the team, you're just thinking about like your next most important thing. You're going to get that out there as fast as possible, and you're going to do the minimum viable DevOps necessary, right? Mm-hmm. It's very interesting seeing mobbers from multiple teams all get together in the same place, do lean coffee on something, say this is an area that we can improve in as a whole, and move that forward and do it in a very lightweight way. Because I think we've struggled over the years with doing this in an effective and inexpensive way.
Yeah, definitely.
So,
and a question I have for you, because since I joined the team, DevOps has been integrated into all the roles, and I never got to see kind of what it was like to have the DevOps, the dedicated DevOps group. Could you talk a little bit about what that was like and the differences between them?
I think this is just one of the projects. So, I think it actually naturally emerges out of Conway's Law sort of stuff. And so if you have a lot of these like big, they're not microservices, they're more like macro services in a project, what'll happen is I think the teams will just naturally say, okay, well, you go work in that project, we'll go work in that project, we'll work in the DevOps project. And then I've also seen other teams where it's like, okay, we need everybody to know everything, and so we're rolling dice to rotate people through. Other projects are just small enough that everything has to be done by everyone, in the mobbing format. And so when you have enough, like for mobs, for a project containing 3 mobs, right? There are 2 ways you can go. One is everybody handles everything all the way through, and the other is separated out by concern. But I think the architecture also it reinforces the communication structure of the team. And so I think that it kind of ended up this way. Because of the way that the architecture was split up. But we did start getting very resource efficiency type behaviors versus flow efficiency type behaviors. And I think one thing that I noticed just over time was that there was this queuing happening, that it's like, oh, hey, pipeline's red for this one dependency, but we're not going to worry about it. Let's just email the DevOps mob, which is like right next to us, and they'll take care of it when they're free. And so what would happen is like this feature would be dependent on some completely unrelated item for a really long time. And I just saw multiple instances of that. And so that really...
I've seen it as well. Yeah.
That really solidified in my head that always optimizing for flow efficiency might be the way to go. Yeah. And that's when I started doing research, and I found that video from the efficiency paradox, which I keep recommending to people. And because what really ends up happening, and this is the whole point of Kanban in general, is like Kanban should be, you take a single item and you get it all the way to done, right? You don't do anything else until it's all the way to done. And these Kanban boards with like, okay, we're now in the testing phase, so we're going to start a new development thing. Like, that's not flow efficiency. That's just taking Kanban and manipulating it to be the resource efficiency that we had before.
Yeah.
And the same queuing time ends up happening because they have a backlog for the testing team, right? And so I think unless all specialties are available in a self-organizing manner for a single item to make it all the way through, you're not going to get these sub day delivery times for items. It's just highly unlikely it's going to happen. It's like your testing team needs to be your software engineers. Your DevOps team needs to be your software engineers. Your database engineers need to be your software engineers, and you need to be working on that piece all the way from beginning to end, a full vertical slice, push it all the way out. That's how you reduce your cycle time. And that was that same case when I was talking to that other DevOps engineer about just the experiences that they had with, I can't get anybody to create automated tests and bugs keep shipping because the pipeline's automated. It's like, why did I automate the pipeline if we're going to just keep shipping bugs? And so, and I could just hear a lot of frustration because it takes kind of like a very cohesive look at the problem. You can't just say, okay, we're going to optimize this piece over here and not optimize this piece. And so like when I see, this was us like 8 years ago, right? We were just completely separated by role. And since then, all of those roles, we had testers back then. They all merged into the team. We basically had dedicated DevOps or database engineers, and we merged them into the team. We were essentially relying on our network services team to do all of our deployments, and so we passed that over, and that's now into the team. And so nearly everything is mobbed on, and what you get is this reduction in cycle time gradually over time, and that's been that's been really good, really healthy for us.
Yeah, so I'll try to summarize a bit, and then I have a question for you both that I think is an interesting problem So, I mean, it seems like you can have dedicated DevOps. We've talked about the pros and cons of that. Mm-hmm. You can have completely cross-functional mobs, so to speak, where you have the DevOps engineer is part of the mob, and maybe he'll float around to different mobs as needed. And then you kind of have this hybrid thing where it's like the cross-functional, but then you'll have these summits once a week or twice a week where a bunch of people who are interested in DevOps will get together and do infrastructure-type work, reducing deep code between Lambdas or whatever. So then there, in my mind, rises maybe a personnel problem, right? Mm-hmm. So you have someone who's like, I want to do DevOps, pipeline, infrastructure as code all the time. Mm. How do you solve that? Because if you optimize for flow efficiency, that means if he's part of a cross-functional mob, he or she's not going to be doing that all the time, right? And so, what are your guys' thoughts on that problem? I don't have an answer.
I have a lot to say on it, but I'll let Zach talk first.
I wish I had some silver bullet to answer that problem. If someone is dedicated or only wants to be doing that one thing, is not really interested in other pieces, then perhaps mobbing in an integrated way is not really a role that they want to be in, and there might not be anything outside of that, and then you might want to make a DevOps mob in order to accommodate that person. However, then you're kind of setting it for resource efficiency.
Yep.
And that's in order to accommodate the personnel, but hopefully the people that are coming in are interested in learning other things, and you can still have your specialties within the mob. I think that is really healthy mobbing behavior, when there's a diversity of specialties, because that's all DevOps is. It's just a specialty, and it's great to have someone that has a specialty in DevOps, someone for cloud architecture, someone for database. It's healthy to have that person as kind of like a lead and teaching the other people as they're going, and they're the specialty, but everyone works on the same code. Because just because you're the specialist or the master or something doesn't mean someone who is fresh to it might not have something to contribute in that way that can help you, even as a master.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think I'll just add on to that. I think we've seen that before, right? Like I've had people say like, hey, I'd rather hop around from mob to mob. So like hopping around from mob to mob, I think is a healthier thing, right? Like I want to be doing DevOps all the time, so I'm going to find all the mobs that have DevOps coming up, and then I'll just ask them to come get me when I'm ready, when they're ready. In other models, it might be in the efficiency paradox video, the TED Talk, he talks about the medical industry, medical care in general, and just saying like, okay, I have to go see different specialist physicians, and in some medical environments, basically all the specialists are co-located. It's like, oh, this whole building is neurosurgeons, and you'll have to make an appointment for each one. Well, it creates queuing time. It might be months and months before you actually get treated, where organizations that have realized this problem will have one of each specialist in that area, but those people might be idle for some time. But what ends up happening is all of their patients get treated a lot more frequently. It's usually just a walk from one part of the building to the next, go and talk to those people, and then a lot of times something that takes greater than 9 months in the medical industry will end up taking a single day, just because they were able to make every single appointment for them that day for everybody that they needed to see for treatment. And it's the same sort of thing, right? Like if we're trying to if we've deemed that, so again, we want to look at what people want for their careers, but if we've deemed that we know that it's financially important that we get customer feedback quickly, and that we have something in the pipe that needs to get to the customer very fast, then a lot of it has to do with just saying, well, what's the least expensive way to get that feedback from the customer quickly? And a lot of that is going to be, let's get everything all the way to production as fast as possible. That might mean that those specialists are not doing their specialty all the time. And yes, that's unfortunate, but it is a direct conflict between how we want to be doing these things necessarily, right? Like in an agile software environment, if we want to be as efficient with the people that we have as possible, and make the most money, then with the resources that we have, the number one thing that I think we've seen in recent years is that cycle time is crucial for that.
Yeah. It's a great question. What do you feel like you have an answer on it, or some thoughts?
No, I mean, I really like what you guys said, and I mean, I think at some point it might just be an impasse, right? Because if classic lean is right and flow efficiency is the best for the company, then that means that you are not going to be in your specialty all the time, right? Yeah. I mean that is a classic lean thing, is to be more general, or you float around. And I like that idea, like the float around. What were you going to say?
Yeah. So or I think that that specialist might need extra learning time or something along those lines. Like they learn more about their specialty while they are waiting, right? And so I think for us, right, specialties in the group are only really defined by how they spend their learning time. And so because everybody's working on everything all the time anyway, and if we're achieving single item work in process to deliver and creating flow efficiency, then that fundamentally means that they will not be able to do their specialty all the time.
Yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Maybe one last thing in a close, and so this is something I was kind of thinking about, was the whole dream, so to speak, of DevOps, right, is developers and operations working together.
Yep.
And in my mind, it feels like mobbing is kind of like that dream state. It's not like, oh, you guys are in separate buildings, and okay, let's put you in the same building. Oh, you're on the same team, but you work individually. It's like, no, you work together on the same mob. And literally, that is the culture you're searching for, is that you have the empathy for the different roles and you learn each other's skills. Yeah. And so I kind of feel like if you want the best DevOps, maybe mobbing is the thing to try out to build that culture.
I will say this, like in early days, so when I first started with mobbing and everything like that, when mobbing first started, the cultural norm was that we would hand everything off to a network group, and the network group would then take it and put it in some quarantine and then move it to staging environment, and then they'd take that quarantine staging thing after it had been evaluated and move it to a production environment. I think everybody's kind of been there. And the first kind of incremental step to that DevOps-y type culture is our infrastructure people started working with us on automating those things. And we just said, hey, are you copying those files over manually? Oh, yes, we are. Let's write a script together to do that. And so incrementally, we just automated more and more of what they were doing for us, until the point where we just said, hey, we're just going to put it in this folder, and then it's just going to do all that stuff for you anyway. And then gradually over time, it wasn't even put that in that folder anymore. That's when we started integrating our pipelines and things along those lines. So it was like a very incremental transition. Again, is the diffusion of innovation theory.
Yes.
We talk about that a lot here. So I think that just for people that are trying to get into DevOps for the first time, and you're looking for kind of that first incremental thing, like a lot of it is just saying, what's the smallest thing we can automate to close our cycle time down, right? And it can be a very small incremental thing, but that's going to be more time you have in the future to work on it some more. And so, yeah, gradually over time you get there.
So it almost is going back to the automationist role in the mob programming RPG, like just wearing that hat more and more will increment you toward more and more towards the DevOps type culture.
Yeah. So for gradually over 4 years, for the first 4 years of mobbing, we went from barely, basically queuing time every step of the way to, our testers are now merged into the mob, and then now our deployments are automatically carried from like X copy scripts from one environment to the next. And then by the time we started scaling the team, actually our pipelines, it's really funny, our pipelines didn't actually come into the process until we had multiple mobs. And the only reason we said it's necessary at that point was because people were forgetting the steps that it took to actually do the deployments. And so we were just like, okay, well, it doesn't make sense to remember this stuff. Let's automate it. So we didn't even have like a DevOps goal because we were already releasing twice a day by then. And so it wasn't like we got to close down our cycle time. Our cycle time was really good at that point. It was actually just like having a checklist and going through it wasn't as good as just automating the checklist. and that was really important. So I don't know. It's just kind of like, hopefully, like, it's very attainable and it can happen very gradually. It took us 4 years to get to releasing 2 times a day, and then about another year for everything to be automated for all the way to production. And so in 5 years, it's very easy, not easy, but it's very incrementally viable to get from being in kind of a traditional waterfall environment to daily releases.
Yeah, and that was, I think, a cool thing for me and Zach and joining is like day one, we mobbing, we changed something and pushed it to prod, and it was in prod, and now I'm like, what is going on? This is amazing!
Shock to the system.
Yeah, but I didn't build any of that infrastructure. But then when you and I got to mob together, we actually had to build some of these from scratch, and it was kind of cool to realize the benefit of it and be like, oh, that's why we're putting time into this. This has so much value, So.
Yeah.
And a lot of it is like, that's just how we do it today because it's been proven effective for us everywhere else. But it's like, back before, you just have learned to do it a different way, and then it would have just kind of come from the mob, and then you just realize things automate. And we're still realizing new things automate, from day to day. It's like, time it took us to get a server in the past was like 3 months, and then it went down to 3 weeks, and then it went down to 3 hours, and now it's like 3 minutes, right?
Yeah.
And so a lot of that stuff is just like gradually over time building those things. And then we're talking about infrastructure as code and automating the generation of the infrastructure as code.
Yeah.
And I have a lot of I have friends talking a lot about these like no code platforms and things along those lines. And so it'll just keep more and more of it will just keep getting automated, and we'll be and with that automation we'll grow in capability, and we'll be able to do more and affect more things. So it's really cool.
Well, before closing out, is there anything you wanted to share, Zach? And
one last thing that I wanted to touch on was just that having infrastructure as code and having codified DevOps into some area can really help others learn and stand on the shoulders of giants. When I first came into the mob, I didn't know what pipelines were, I didn't know CI/CD, I wasn't familiar with it, and I was able to, as soon as I stepped in, when it was time for me and you to make a new pipeline, we had tons, and we had plenty of examples that we could take from, and that was great for the pipeline, because someone who had already had a good idea of how to make a pipeline, it was set up there already. And that can happen as well for infrastructure as code if you're using cloud resources. You can use those as examples directly. And so the need for the DevOps engineer, like, sure, they can build things for you, but also they can leave traces and artifacts for other people to pick up on. And that's been tremendously helpful in me learning.
And maybe this will be a future episode, but you embed that knowledge into the code, and you might even consider refactoring your pipeline so it's more readable, so that knowledge is more easily accessible.
Pipeline quality, I like it.
Yeah. So maybe we'll cue that up for a future episode. We'll see.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks for watching Mob Mentality. Please like and subscribe, and if there's anyone you feel like would benefit from this video, please share. And other than that, have a good one. See ya.
Bye.
Take care.